Hello, Paul. Hey, Paul.
Hey,
How are
Zach.
you?
I'm good. How are
Hi,
you?
Mr. Kapilov. How are you? Oh, man. Ugh, a little early. I'll let you share. How's everything, Paul? Things are good?
Pretty good.
Very
My,
nice.
my daughter might join tonight.
Oh, wow. That's nice. Did you send her a link or you want me to send the link?
I sent her a link.
Okay, good, good. Wow, that's awesome. I'm so,
She's a fan of the Odyssey.
oh, wow. Oh, what's going on with me? Okay. So I let you share. So if you want to share, because I really don't have anything to,
Okay, well, I'll wait until
yeah, no
people,
problem. Sure.
people join.
Yep. Well, we got people that didn't sign up coming in. That's good. That's good. Means that the social network is working. That's good. All right.
Stephanie from Paraguay.
Yeah. Well, she works for Paraguayan consulate, right, Stephanie?
The international.
Hi, yeah, I work for the permanent mission of Paraguay to the UN in New York, the United Nations.
Oh, wow.
Actually, I'm still in a meeting now, but I connected anyway, so hopefully this will end soon.
Okay. Good. Good. No problem. Our meeting is more interesting. I'm Mikhail. Hi, Ralph. How are you? We got the fellow UN, Stephanie.
Yeah, for sure. I hopefully, I think everything is more interesting than this. So
what, what is the latest and the greatest? Hi, Emma.
Ah, there she is.
Oh, that's your daughter.
That's my daughter.
Nice, nice to meet you. Welcome.
Hi, thanks.
Sure. Paul's our Greek history expert and a lot of history expert. You know, Eastern front of the World War II, anything basically, Roman history, anything. Marika, hi. Oh, I might just gave a thumbs up. Awesome.
Hi, Zach.
Oh my God, Marika, how are you?
Hi.
Marika, did you decide what you want to present by any chance, or whatever you want? Just let me know, okay? I can always assign, you know, assign the subject matter for you.
Are you talking to me?
Yeah, you like the you know, Al Pacino from.
Right.
Are you talking to me? You talking to me? Say hello to my little friend. Is that what it is?
Yep. So my computer acts up, so sometimes the camera goes off and there's no way that I can put it on. So I'm getting a new computer because I think this is too old. So
Yeah, that's what I did. I was buying my kids' computers and never got anything for me. Finally, I found something on discount, and you know, Apple, and I was able to get that through. You can go to swappa.com and everything there is. I mean, they don't really do it. They check you have to check it before you pay. So they put it in like a escrow account until you check the a computer or a phone or iPad. If you buy from them, swappa.com. I bought like for $1,000 new laptop, sorry, new laptop, Apple.
that's great.
How you doing, Lisa?
Oh, Lisa, what's going
Hi,
on?
hi, guys.
3 in a row. Wow.
Hey, gals. How you doing?
3 in a row. That's awesome. I'm glad. How's you're in California, right?
Yeah.
How's the weather down there?
Shall I even tell you? I don't know.
Oh, yeah, we're all in the same boat. Yeah, we're
Yeah, shorts and a t-shirt.
Mm.
Yeah.
We were so jealous.
Yeah. But you won't be when we hit our fire season, which seems like that's our new 5th season now.
It seems like every day is a fire season in this COVID.
Gosh, it's crazy.
And I mean, they're saying the case is dwindling, but I don't know how, you know what I'm saying? It could be dwindling, and the next week it could be increasing. It's like it's never ending.
Yeah.
Greg wanted to say something.
No, I was just,
Clearing your throat?
yes.
Oh, wow. All right. So I just, while everybody's on, you know, this week, we still have 2 more presentations. We have an interesting one on Sunday, monastic order, Jesuits and whatnot. And it would be Anne presenting. I hope she's going to be on today. And tomorrow we have history of the World Cup. If there's anybody interested, we did start, you know, sports segment. We'll be doing the American Cup on sailing in a month or so. So we are now multifunctional. But originally we started with ancient history, and we still continue with that. And right now we're in Greece, and also today is the segment of ancient text, and today we're talking about Odyssey, Homer, and Paul is presenting that. So so let me know, Paul, if you want to.
Yeah, let's give it a few more minutes.
Okay, a few more minutes while. And you know, I'm gonna post March stuff, but we have some interesting one. We have actually Siberian archipelago. We have Napoleon in the March, and you know, a bunch of interesting stuff we have. So if anybody wants to, we have Diadochi, which is in the week after this week. You know, it's a generals of Alexander the Great. So should be interesting. And so we've flipped from modern to ancient history. And if you wanted to see our schedule, it's omnicarta.org. You can look at our schedule, or any recorded sessions like Alexander the Great and any other sessions that anybody presented is on that YouTube channel. And I'll post the name of the.
Maybe while we're waiting, I could ask people in the chat, just put in the chat how familiar you are with the Odyssey. Is it something that you really know inside out? Are you slightly familiar with it? Have you never read it? So then give me some hint about, you know, how to guide my presentation. That would be helpful to me if you guys would do that.
Okay.
Okay. I should have had a poll going, sorry.
And while we're doing that, does anybody know off the top of your head what the next text is?
We're doing, we're gonna be probably doing, and Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, we're doing dialogues, right?
I suggested that. I actually, since we're here, maybe you want to, if you, I wonder how many people would be interested into discussing specifically the dialogue of apology. You know, that's the Socrates defense. It's not a big one. So I don't know.
Alex also had
Who is interested? Can you raise your hand or put it on the chat? If you're not interested, fine. You know, but I just want to get an idea if it's worth discussing. If you're interested in discussing something like that.
Sure. All right. Okay, so just let me just.
Greg, interested in what? I'm sorry, I was typing.
In Plato's dialogue, apology.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So we're gonna that's official. We're gonna do one in March, probably toward the end. Is it enough time, Greg?
Sure, sure. Yeah,
Sure.
just let's discuss the date. Just run it by me before you schedule it. Okay.
Okay, so I see that most people have read it a few times, and some people haven't read it but are familiar with the story. Very good. Okay. I think we could get going if that's okay with you, Zach.
Yes, I'll let you share. Let me know.
Okay. Here we go. Is that the pointer? Laser. Here we go. Okay, so we're going to start on talking about Homer's Odyssey today. Just to introduce myself, I'm Paul. I'm a history buff. I'm not in any way an academic or an expert or a historian. Just somebody that really loves this stuff and reads it a lot, like many of you. The ground rules for today is that there are no ground rules. Please feel free to, whenever the spirit moves you, to please jump in and say what you're thinking. Any contribution that you want to make will be more than welcome. These Wednesday presentations are designed to be on the informal side. So I'm going to do a little bit of analysis, but not terribly much. And then I'm going to spend most of my time kind of walking through the story with a lot of graphics that I pulled. And I'm hoping that people will, jump in when we reach something that has some sort of association for you, or something is particular about the story that you like, or any other thing that you want to do. The statue that we're looking at here is a statue from what's called the Speralonga sculptures, which were taken from basically a cave that was used by the Emperor Tiberius to host dinner parties. And you had to be very brave to go to one of Tiberius's dinner parties. You really didn't know how you might end up, but in any event, he had a cave where he did this, where there was a whole bunch of different types of sculptures, and most of them revolving around Odysseus, the blinding of the Cyclops, the attack by Scylla. There's one of Odysseus about to betray Diomedes after they steal the statue of Athena, the Palladium, from Troy. So there he is. And so in the Greek, he's often called Odysseus Polytropos, the man of many turnings. And you can translate it different ways, the most translation, but you can see what it means. And underneath this, we have a quote: "I hate the man like the very gates of death, who says one thing but hides another in his breast." This was from the Iliad, and it was said just as Odysseus was leading a delegation of people to Achilles to try to convince him to rejoin the battle. And Achilles kind of let Odysseus know what he thought of him and what he thought about the man of many turnings. But he's caught the imagination through the ages. This is a Roman sesterce, a silver coin of the Roman Republic, 82 BC. And it shows a very famous scene from the Odyssey of Odysseus disguised as a beggar, coming to his home where no one recognizes him but his dog, who greets him and then wags his tail once and dies. Odysseus has been away for 20 years, so the dog really hung on for a while to be able to say goodbye to his master. And Odysseus has really stirred people's imaginations through the centuries, through the millennia, actually. This is an illustration of a scene from Dante's Inferno. Dante and his guide, Virgil, meet Odysseus in hell. Interestingly, Dante never got to read the Odyssey because the Greek versions of these ancient texts had not reached the West during Dante's lifetime. So his familiarity with Odysseus came through what he could glean from Virgil, from Ovid, and other authors, but he put Odysseus down in the 8th circle of hell with the fraudsters, with his buddy Diomedes. More modern depiction of the way the stories of the Odyssey stir the imagination. Here we have a kid's, I don't know, maybe these are 9-year-olds or 10-year-olds who are apparently had a school unit on the Odyssey and have illustrated different scenes. Here's another in color, maybe a little more skillful drawings. And here is something from 2,700, 2,800 years prior to those kids' drawings, the wine jug from 730 BC. And on the neck of the jug is a very interesting scene. Interestingly, it's not much more more elaborate or more skilled than the children's drawings in terms of the quality of the figures. And it's also interesting that the archaeologists date this vase to about 730 BC, and the historians date Homer to about 730 BC, or right around that time. So this is a contemporaneous item of the time when Homer was in the process of converting these oral stories into writing with his own touch. And the interesting thing here is that there's no way to make sure what we're looking at. So on the one hand, we could be looking at a scene from the Odyssey. And we'll talk about what that was, but it's a shipwreck. There's a man sitting on the upside down keel of his ship. His shipmates are in the water, and the fishes are coming after them, like Luca Brasi. They're going to sleep with the fishes. And so it could be a scene from the Odyssey, but it also could be just a generic shipwreck. And the interesting thing here is that the people who were using this wine jug, who were drinking wine from it, the people who were listening to Homer and bards of that period, were people for whom this could have been a real life personal experience. This was the period of Greek colonization, and the idea of being shipwrecked at sea was to them, like for us, a bad motor accident or an airplane crash. It was something that was absolutely within the realm of possibility. And what that brings us to is that you can see Odysseus cast very often as the leader of a colonial expedition. The word for that in Greek is oikistis. That's the name of an oikos is a household, and the leader is the oikistis. That was the name that was given to the individuals that would lead colonization expeditions. That was a real big deal, actually. And they were frequently deified afterwards, always patron of the city that they founded. And this is a little couple of verses from the Odyssey. And This is actually as Odysseus and his crew are approaching the island of the Cyclops. And Odysseus describes it. The water meadows along the low foaming shore run soft and moist, and your vines would never flag. The land's clear for plowing, harvest on harvest. A man could reap a healthy stand of grain. The subsoil's dark and rich. This is the eye of someone that's scouting for a place to land a colony. Where should we go? Where is the grazing good? Where is the, will we have good places for agriculture? And
Paul,
yes.
can I ask you, what was the meaning of colonization for the Greeks at the time? I mean, was going to one place and staying in that place and
Yes.
having a base? Or what was the idea?
What the idea was, I mean, there are lots of different theories, but I think the consensus idea is that there was population was rising, and there was a sense that there was some overpopulation, and there were also some kind of rambunctious people that the people in their city would very gladly see leave. So people were basically encouraged to leave home and go found a colony and live there and form a new city. And that would be an independent city with some kind of sympathetic links to the city that they came from, but not really a colony in the way that in the modern world, the colonial power rules the colony. The colonies were always independent. And given the nature of communications, how long it took to get back and forth, it would have to be that way anyway. But the colonies would frequently start as a kind of a scouting and trading expedition, and then settlers would come and they would bring families, they would intermarry with the local population, and that's how Greek cities spread, such that the Greek world was sometimes described as a string of pearls around the Aegean and other in the Black Seas. So all around the seas, on the coast of what is now Turkey, all around the Black Sea, around Thrace, around Greece itself, and then going over to Italy, Sicily, and up into southern Italy, was all known as what was called Magna Graecia, Greater Greece. And these were Greek cities. They would come back to Greece to compete in the Olympic Games, for example. They were fully Greek, but they lived in Sicily, or they lived on an island near modern Naples, or on the toe of the boot. And so that's what Greek colonization was. And there was Carthaginian colonization going on at the same time, and so there was some competition there. But that's the nature of what it was. And in the course of doing this, basically, the Greeks were sailing into what to them was the unknown, and they were in particular encountering people from the East who were more advanced. The people in the East had civilizations that had been continuous for thousands of years before the Greeks got there. The Greeks were able to write during the 2nd century BC, and they lost that during the collapse of Greek Dark Age around 1100 to 800 BC.
Paul, that's the 2nd millennium BC.
Did I say?
You said century.
Okay, thank you, Ralph. Yes, 2nd millennium BC. So they were encountering these civilizations that were more civilized than they were. And they were the Greeks were avid copiers of whatever worked for them. They would always put a Greek flavor on it, but they imported in what was called the Orientalizing movement, a huge amount of Eastern art. So here we're looking at the face of the Gorgon, called the Gorgonian, and we learned in one of the earlier lectures that the origin of the Gorgon goes all the way back to the demon Humbaba in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and there are illustrations in which where it's very clear that this is the same image. And so this Orientalizing movement and this basic fantasy of encountering monsters beyond civilization led to what is really the major theme of the Odyssey, which is that of civilization versus barbarism. And one of the major ways that that is seen, the way that that's understood, is through what's a code of civilized behavior that the Greeks called xenios. Xenios means stranger, but it also means hospitality. Zeus, in one of his aspects, was known as Zeus Xenios, the god of strangers. And there were rules for how you were supposed to behave with strangers. You had to invite them in. You had to guarantee their safety. You had to feed them without asking any questions, without even asking their name. After they'd eaten, after they'd drunk, then you could ask them who they are, and they would respond, and then they would form things called guest friendships, where there would be a gift exchange, and then their descendants would have a bond that could go on for many, many generations, and people who had been guest friends might encounter each other on the battlefield, and if they recognized each other, would go somewhere else, so they wouldn't be tempted to break the code of Xenia. And basically, this defined what Homer calls God-fearing men, and they weren't just Greeks. Basically, it was anybody that understood these laws of hospitality, feared the gods, because the gods protected strangers. And we can see in the Odyssey that you see examples of good hospitality and bad hospitality all through the book. And the ideals of hospitality are seen as the highest good. So the very first scene in the Odyssey is a council of the gods. And then Athena comes to the island of Ithaca in disguise. And she's first spotted by Odysseus's son, Telemachus. And he runs to her because he sees her standing outside the door of his house and says, "Forgive me for not noticing you sooner, stranger." Brings her in, though she was in the guise of a man, and gives her the best hospitality. Later on, we see examples. Telemachus visits Menelaus, and he visits Nestor, who were participants in the Trojan War, and their hospitality is so over the top. I know that when I read this, until I had studied this Greek history, I was always kind of put off by this because it seemed so unreal. But now I now see how critical it is, and the idea is that you are kind of instructed to contrast the hospitality given by heroes to the Cyclops, who's the exact negative of the worst possible. Well, he eats his guests. You really can't get much worse than that. And the laws of hospitality, not only did you have to welcome your guest and give him presents, but you should not keep him longer than he wanted to stay. So we'll see that Odysseus was rescued from the sea by the nymph Calypso, but she wouldn't let him leave. He had to stay there on her island for 7 years. And all the encounters that Odysseus has, you can kind of look at them through this lens of Xenia to basically have it define to you what they're trying to say about the character, if you will, and the level of civilization of the people that he's meeting. The Odyssey itself can be seen roughly in 3 major sections. Now, I'm not going to get into any sort of discussion of the authorship. Was Homer real? Was it written by one person? So there are scholars who will say that these different pieces were written by different people, and I'm not going there. But it's just a convenient way to divide the story into some major pieces. So the first piece is called the Telemachia, the journey of Telemachus. The second are Odysseus arrives to the people called the Phocaeans and tells them his tales. And then finally, the Nostos. The Nostos was a literary genre, which was the homecoming of the hero from war. So overall, the Odyssey is the Nostos of Odysseus, but within it, there are smaller nostoi. So there is the Nostos of Menelaus, who describes how he came home. And there's the Nostos of Nestor. And there's the Nostos of Agamemnon, who's murdered by his wife on his return. So these are the 3 major ways to look at this. And at this, I'm going to just kind of jump into the story. Before I do that, anybody have any comments or anything they want to say or add?
I have a kind of a question, because I was always very curious about where this coming from. Where is this being friendly to the other, the people who are not part of their, civilization or whatever? Where do you think that comes from? Because
I think it comes from the basic understanding that if you don't have something like that, you cannot travel in the world. So if you start becoming civilized, and this is not only a Greek custom, I mean, we see the same thing in the Hebrew Bible, right? The angels come to Lot's house, and Lot immediately invites them in and contrasts them with the evil people in Sodom that want to kill them. So you really can't have any sort of civilization unless you have some guidance that you're not going to basically rob and kill any stranger that walks into you can't have trade, you can't have anything except barbarism unless you have some notion of this. So I think it evolved kind of naturally in many different places. Okay, so the story of the Odyssey starts.
Hold on a second, Paul.
Sure.
I just wanted to ask, first of all, the tales. If I recall, wasn't he somewhere in Phoenicia when he was?
No, he was with the Phocaeans. It's just, it looks kind of like Phoenicia, but it's not Phoenicia. It's an imaginary place called Phocaea.
Mm-hmm. Imaginary.
No, imaginary, okay. Yes, absolutely imaginary.
Well, what about one thing that I noticed, that this Nostos, it's almost like half of the whole book.
Yes,
why?
It is.
Why is it? Was it like? Is it the idea of revenge was so dominant? You think in the book? Why do you think it took specifically his homecoming and preparation for the revenge and arrangements? It took so long, like it's almost half a book.
I don't know that anybody could really answer that. The one thing that's absolutely clear is that to the extent that the Odyssey is an epic, it is the last half of the book that's epic, because the first parts, there's nothing epic about it. The Telemachia is like a Bildenroman. I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but a German word for the story of the journey of a young person through adolescence and adulthood, that's not really a terrifically epic story. And the tales that Odysseus tells, once again, we'll see them. They have many of the same formulae of fairy tales. The hero is warned not to do something, so of course he does it. Things happen, once, twice, and then the third time. So they're kind of a collection of tales. And so the real meat of the book is in the homecoming of Odysseus. And that's where all of a sudden you start seeing things that resemble the Iliad more in terms of the way the characters are presented. Even though there are still tremendous differences, the Odyssey is much more domestic. There's a much greater role for women in the Odyssey. There's a much greater respect for women in the Odyssey than there is in the Iliad. There are major female characters in the Odyssey who are very important. Penelope, Odysseus's wife, a young girl, Nausicaa, who we'll get to see, who basically rescues Odysseus. The nymph, Calypso, Circe, powerful women. Some of them not very pleasant, but powerful women. And also women praised just for normal things. So the women in Phaeacia are described as being like the men are great sailors, the women are great weavers. They were a marvel to be seen. So that's kind of the difference in flavor. But at the same time, it's clear that there's continuity with the Iliad, because the character of individuals is consistent with the way those individuals are depicted in the Iliad. Odysseus is very much the same person as in the Iliad. Nestor, Menelaus, Agamemnon, all those people who appear are basically the same. Helen, they're basically the same people operating in the same way. Nestor is still a pompous old fart. And Helen is always still aloof and composed. So it's clear that certainly whoever wrote the Odyssey, if it's not the same author as the Iliad, or if it's multiple authors, they were clearly familiar with the characters as they're depicted in the Iliad. So,
Paul.
Yeah.
Paul, so Odysseus is the king of Ithaca, which I guess is on the west coast of the mainland of Greece, or an island off the west coast?
Island off the west coast. Near the modern.
Now, does he identify?
Near the modern island of Zakynthos.
Okay. Now, does he identify as Greek in the Iliad? There are the Achaeans and the Lacedaemonians and various groups, and then Nestor of Pylos. Did he identify as Greek, or was he an Ithacan? What was his sort of geographic identity?
Really, really interesting question. Clearly, these people had something in common. They would consider themselves, they could use the word Argive, which specifically means people from Argos, but it was used as a more general description for all the Greeks. Achaea also was a region in Greece, but it was once again used to apply on a wider sense. In the Odyssey or in Homer, they never use the word Greek, which is actually a word that Greeks never used. It's a Roman word, not a very complimentary word either. The word that the Greeks used to describe themselves was Hellenic, but that word never appears in Homer. But what kind of defines Hellenic is they speak Greek, they worship the same gods, they have the same basic customs and values. So they're clearly a related people even though they would, and they cooperate with each other or go to war with each other. So they have this kind of dual loyalty to their local place of origin, as well as to being a Greek in general. And this is, by the way, we said 730 BC. That's also around the time for the beginning of the Olympic Games. Maybe someone here, I bet you.
776.
So Greg, I knew would have the exact date. So the Olympic Games were one of several pan-Hellenic festivals, which were also part of forging Greek identity. The Oracle of Apollo at Delphi was another thing like that. And also, it was these stories. So in the beginning of the Iliad, there is a famous part called the catalog of the ships. And basically, for any modern reader, it's got to be hopelessly boring, but it was tremendously exciting to the Greeks, because what it does is it goes through all the different cities that sent people to Greece, and it says who was their leader and how many ships they sent and something about them that describes them. And this was a source of pride. And later Greeks who were not mentioned in the catalog of the ships would try to manufacture some basis to claim that they were allied to a people who were in the catalog of the ships. So, for example, the Athenians have very, very slight mention in the Iliad, almost nothing. But they, at some point, came into possession of the island of Salamis, which is off the coast of Greece, which was the home of the hero Ajax, who was the greatest Greek after Achilles. And so Ajax became very much a hero of Athens and figuring in a lot of iconography, because they could claim him as saying, well, yes, see, we were there along with Agamemnon and Achilles. Our ancestors go back to that as well.
But, you know, we talked about this, but I find it very curious why Athens were ignored. And the archives, they call every Greeks archives, this the Peloponnesian peninsula. It's not Attic, Argos in Peloponnesian peninsula. So it's really strange. There are all kinds of regions there. There's a Thessaly, there is Euboea, right?
But they are in the catalog of ships, and they're featured. So, the island of Euboea.
Yeah, that's right. But no Athens specifically,
right?
And there is no hero directly from Athens.
They talk about King Menestheus in the Iliad, and so he has about 2 lines, but that's about it.
Yeah.
And interestingly, there's no mention at all of the city of Thebes. And
right.
The explanation that's given for that is that in an earlier, you have to think of this Homeric world like a universe, like the way we talk today of the Marvel universe or the DC universe. It's a long series of stories where all the stories are interrelated. So there's the story of Thebes, where ultimately Thebes was razed to the ground and destroyed, and so there were no Thebans in the expedition to Troy at all.
When was it destroyed? You're referring to which?
The 7 against Thebes. So this was
right, but that's at the very end. That's after the war, right?
No, it's before the war. It's the generation immediately before the Iliad. So one of the participants in 7 against Thebes was Tydeus. Tydeus is the father of Diomedes, who was a hero at the Trojan War.
Oh, okay. Yeah, but still, Athens definitely was a developed Mycenaean city,
Absolutely.
and at the time, and it was ignored. I actually think that the whole idea of this epic, let's say specifically Iliad, especially, is about unification and forming of the Greek identity. We don't really know, how many, how many parts of Greek world participate in that war. It seems it probably was greatly exaggerated. But I think the idea of creating this kind of epic, I personally think it was created before Homer, maybe as an oral tradition, and maybe then Homer was specifically a particular good poet who put it in a better verse. That's my idea, But
I basically agree with you. I think that these stories may well have been current during Mycenaean times.
Yeah.
And there's some 400 years that separate them or more from Homer. And we see that there were many other variants on these stories that didn't make it into Homer at all, but they were shown in Greek art in a very wide way. So, and there were generations. So the 7 against Thebes, these people at Thebes, these were the children of Oedipus. So that goes back a generation after that. And then there's a generation before that, you get to Hercules, or Heracles. So it's very, you're absolutely right though, about being something that establishes Greek identity. It's kind of like, in Shakespeare and Henry V, tell your children that I was with the king, on that day, you'll never forget it. Okay, the Odyssey. We have a council of the gods. And interestingly, I'm not going to take too much time to talk about, once again, there are all these social history nuggets. Just the idea that there is a council. Everything that the gods do, people do also. Everything that people do, the gods do also. So the idea that there are councils, there are assemblies where there's some type of deliberation, even if it's only for the king or Zeus to tell everybody what the story is and maybe listen to their complaints and tell them to shut up. Still, they had this institution. And when Homer describes the Cyclops, he says they never have any assemblies. They have no laws and they have no assemblies. Once again, this contrast of civilization and barbarism. So here are all the gods. And especially let's note Poseidon. And Poseidon is actually not in this particular conference. That's very important. Poseidon is away visiting the Ethiopians. Poseidon hates Odysseus, and we'll talk about why later. But what's going to happen in this conference is that Athena is going to get up and say, poor Odysseus, why don't we let him come home? Which she wouldn't dare have said if Poseidon was there. So she had to wait until he was away. And then the other gods felt comfortable enough to say, yes, go ahead. So meanwhile, Odysseus is out on Calypso's island. That's the nymph Calypso. This is a painting by William Russell Flint, who was a Scottish illustrator, watercolorist of the late 19th century, early 20th century. So there's Odysseus sitting and brooding about wanting to go home. Meanwhile, back home, things are not so good. His house has been taken over by these unruly people who want to marry his wife, Penelope. And she is trying to resist them. And they, getting impatient because she's not telling them what they want to hear, are eating Odysseus out of house and home. They are copulating with his slave girls, basically doing everything they possibly can to be obnoxious. And it's a good, once again, example of the reverse of good hospitality. So Athena comes down into this situation, and among these suitors, let's go back here, we don't see him in this picture, is Odysseus's young son Telemachus, who is basically totally impotent to do anything to protect his house, to stop these people from doing whatever they want. And so Athena takes it upon herself to come down and basically catalyze the growth of Telemachus. And interestingly, when Telemachus first spots her, what's the very first thing that Athena does? She tells a huge, elaborate lie, the exact same type of lies that Odysseus tells throughout the Odyssey. This long story that she makes up to explain to Telemachus who she is. Then later, she appears to Telemachus taking on the image of somebody called Mentor, who was somebody who was known to Telemachus, lived on the island, an old friend of his father. And that's where our word mentor comes from. And he's basically listening to Telemachus's complaints and starting to put some backbone into him. That's Telemachus and Mentor. And Telemachus comes back home, and this is a meeting of him and his mother, Penelope, and that is her famous loom. And the story is that she told the suitors that she will make a decision on who she will marry, but first they have to let her finish her weaving. She's making a shroud for her father-in-law, Laertes, Odysseus's father. And so every day she weaves, and every night she unravels it, and she gets away with this for a very long time. Telemachus comes, and an interesting thing, something that's not particularly pleasant by modern day standards, but the way that Telemachus first shows that he's growing up is that he puts his mother in her place. He tells his mother to go back with the woman, to go back with the other women, that he's the man there now. He's going to run the house. And she basically, be gone, woman. And this is the first sign of his emerging manhood in this patriarchal culture of the ancient Greeks. And he then calls an assembly in which he complains about what the suitors are doing. The suitors basically tell him to shove it. And he decides, or basically Athena, Mentor, puts in his head the idea that he should go to the mainland of Greece, visit his father's old friends, and see if he can get some news of his father. He takes a ship and he goes. The suitors decide that they're going to ambush him and kill him on the way back. And his mother finds out about it. And this part ends, the Telemachia ends with Athena sending a dream to Penelope of how she is escorting his boat safely back home. Her son is going to come back home. And that's the end of that first part of the Iliad. So now we come back to our hero who's on the island of Calypso. And here is a depiction of Calypso. A beautiful immortal who wants Odysseus to become her husband and offers him immortality and eternal youth. And Odysseus will have none of it. He wants to go home. He does kind of, make love to her on a very frequent basis, which he seems to be, doing because she wants him to, but it doesn't look like it was all that painful for him. And so here's another depiction of an ancient depiction of Calypso with entertaining Odysseus. And here she is depicted as a hetaira, which is basically a high class ancient call girl who would entertain at symposia very educated women, very cultured women who were musical and could recite poetry and carry on high level conversations. So that's one depiction of Calypso. This is a Bruegel, Peter Bruegel the Elder, and there is Odysseus, and he doesn't seem to be having such a horrible time with Calypso. And finally, but he still is not content. He wants to get out. And Athena goes to the gods and says, okay, now it's time to really do it. Send Hermes to tell Calypso to let Odysseus go. And this over here, this is kind of a Rubenesque type painting by Annibale Carracci, 1560 to 1609. Well, I'm sorry, that is someone that fell off the slide, so I don't have that. But so Hermes is coming down and instructing Calypso that she has to let him go. And she very reluctantly, you can see her weeping now as her serving women, he has built a raft and they're carrying some wine and food on the raft for his voyage. And there he goes, and he's out on the wine dark sea. And unfortunately for him, at that moment, Poseidon decides to come home from the Ethiopians. He sees Odysseus in his raft, and he is not happy. And he sends a huge storm, and he knocks Odysseus's raft to smithereens. And Odysseus has to swim for his life, and finally manages, for swimming for several days, exhausted, finds an island and manages to find a place where he can pull himself onto shore without being crushed on the rocks, and sleeps. The next day, the island turns out to be this place called Phakeia, where the Phakeans live. And the next day, the daughter of the king, Nausicaa, is urged by Athena. Athena is here looking after Odysseus every step of the way.
Hey, Dad.
Pardon me?
Dad, I just want to ask, where are his men? He's alone at this point?
He's alone at this point. So there'll be flashbacks. At this point, he's completely alone. And so I'll go through in the flashbacks of how many men he started with and how he lost them. But he was totally alone on Calypso's island.
They're all dead by now, right?
Yes, they're all dead. They're all sleeping with the fishes. And so Athena basically puts the idea into Nausicaa's head that she should go down and do the family wash. And as she's doing this, Odysseus, who's naked and completely covered with sea brine and stuff, makes an appearance, and everybody except Nausicaa starts to run. But our hero keeps his wits about him, immediately falls to his knees and tells her that he's another lie, though truth in the lies that he's been shipwrecked at sea. That's certainly the truth. And basically she decides that she's going to take pity on him. On the left, we see another picture of that scene, and we can see Athena is there basically making sure that Nausicaa does the right thing, putting the ideas of what she wants her to do into her mind. And then we see on the right, Nausicaa handing Odysseus a garment to wear. And then she's going to tell Odysseus to follow her back to her father's palace, and throw himself. Another interesting example of the role of women in the Odyssey. She instructs Odysseus to go to the palace and seek out the queen, her mother, not the king, her father, and throw himself at her knees, basically implying that her mother, the queen, is hugely influential, and that she's the one that he should go to seek mercy. He does that, and they give him Xenios. They treat him the right way. This is, an ideal society, and they bring out their bard, whose name is Demodocus. Demodocus is a blind bard, and this is the reason why Homer is said to be blind. There is no indication that really anything reliable about Homer's life, or whether he existed by that name or any other. But this character, Demodocus, in the Odyssey was a blind bard. So Homer has become a blind bard in popular imagination after that. And he starts singing his stories, and Odysseus asks him to sing the story of the fall of Troy. And he sings the story of the Trojan horse. So this is an image of the Trojan horse on something called the Mykonos vase. It's from about 875 BC, and it is the oldest image of something that can be firmly identified as being a story from the epic cycle. Not saying that this came from Homer, but it came from the same source as Homer. So we see this horse with windows, with the Greeks inside it, and then some of the Greeks have dismounted. And the bottom of this vase shows very horrible, horrible scenes of violence as the Greeks sack Troy. And here's a later picture of the sack of Troy by the red figure artist Cleophrades, one of the red figure pioneers. And this was seen as kind of an anti-war statement. The child with the blood coming out of him is Hector's son. The old man who has him in his lap, who's bleeding and is covering his head, is Priam, the king of Troy. And the Greek who's about to kill him is Neoptolemus, who is the son of Achilles. And there are all sorts of scenes in here of really intense violations of norms. So you're not supposed to kill somebody that seeks sanctuary at the altar of a god. The Greeks totally ignored that and stole the images of the gods and raped Cassandra in particular, who was holding on to the image of Athena, and that did not work out well for them in the end. And as Odysseus is hearing these stories, he weeps. And the king, sitting next to him, says, "Tell me why you weep and grieve so sorely when you hear the fate of Argives, hear the fall of Troy." And at this point, finally, he's been there for more than a day. He's taken part in athletic games and all this sort of stuff. He finally tells them who he is. "I am Odysseus, son of Laertes, known to the world for every type of craft. My fame has reached the skies." This is a depiction, a black figure vase, of one of Odysseus's crafty adventures during it's in the Iliad, where he goes on a midnight spying mission, and they capture a Trojan spy. They interrogate him. He's with his buddy Diomedes. Then they kill the spy, and he's told them where there are some newly arrived combatants from Thrace that have come to fight for Troy, and they go and they find them and they behead while they're sleeping, large numbers of them, and they steal their horses. So this is a typical Odysseus adventure.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
When you were talking before about Athena whispering a suggestion to the princess, I'm wondering if Homer or like any of the Greeks make any sort of meaningful distinction between free will or decisions that were made because like the gods wanted them to make that decision.
An interesting point. I think kind of the idea here is that frequently you don't know whether it's literally meant that a god inspired somebody, or it's just a poetic way of saying that somebody made a decision. There certainly are some situations where people come to very bad results because they've taken an action and specifically ignored the gods. So people that don't sacrifice properly to the gods before they do something like go on a journey or go into a battle, the gods always take retribution on them for that. But and in Homer, very frequently, it seems to be absolutely clear that the gods are literally talking to people, but it seems to really be ambiguous in terms of are they really literally saying that a god did this, or is this a metaphorical way of describing the activity that's going on in somebody's brain? And given that Athena is the goddess of wisdom, so you have your own wisdom speaking to you. It's as if the goddess is speaking to you. Or if you are a crazed berserker on the battlefield, Ares, the god of war, is speaking to you. They leave it to your imagination to understand that, and you can take it both ways.
Okay, thanks.
So Odysseus now says that he leaves Troy, and he has with him 10 ships, each with 50 men in it. So he's got 500 people. He's loaded up with treasure, and they're heading home. And on the way, the first place they stop is the island of the Cicones. And here I'm going back to the kids' illustration. And they decide to just do a pirate raid. So Odysseus says, the wind drove me out of Ilium onto Ismarus, the Cicones stronghold. There I sacked the city, killed the men. But as for the wives and plunder, that rich haul we dragged away from the place. We shared it round. Then I urged them to cut and run, set sail. But would they listen? No, they didn't listen. And the Cicones came back in very large numbers and killed a significant number of Odysseus's men and chased them back, and they barely got away, intact. So this is the first adventure that Odysseus narrates. And let me point out that this is absolutely real life, in the sense that these are things, there's nothing fantastical about this. This is exactly what was going on all the time in the world during this period of time. And we can still see things like this happening hundreds of years later when we read the story of Xenophon's retreat from through the heartland of Persia and Mesopotamia. When they see some group of people that they can loot and take their food and take slaves, they immediately go ahead and do it. It's an honorable thing, actually. And then they're back.
Which I'll just make a comment, which is pretty interesting, that the dichotomy of that compared to this whole need for hospitality in foreign lands, and yet you have like perhaps foreigners that are coming in that are then raiding you. So it's a great risk for you to be a
Right.
hospitable host.
Well, I think the idea is that the stranger comes alone, right? You know, if somebody shows up with 500 men armed to the teeth, that's not a stranger that you invite for dinner, right? But if somebody shows up alone, or, you know, 2 people, that's a whole different thing. They're no threat to you, and there you're obligated to show them hospitality.
Got it. Okay.
Okay, so we're back out on the Wine-Dark Sea, and the next place where they land up is the land of the Lotus Eaters. Lotus Eaters, who have no notion of killing my companions, not at all. They simply gave them the lotus to taste instead. And the lotus, of course, makes them forget everything about their previous life, forget their homes, forget their families. All they want to do is stay in the land of the Lotus Eaters, eat more lotus. And, you know, maybe this, you know, it kind of reminds one of an addictive drug. And we can see that Odysseus basically had to knock their heads together. And we can see the kids drawing on the left saying, go, go, go. And the men say, no, 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 we want to say. And on the right is a line drawing of Odysseus really literally grabbing them by the hair and dragging them back onto the boat. And back out onto the Wine-Dark Sea. So we're kind of moving away from the normal world. And then they see this beautiful island. And this is the island that I described in the beginning, which Odysseus looks at with the eye of a colonizer, saying, is this a good place for us to go? Is this a good place where we can grow crops? And Odysseus says to his men, I'll go across with my own ship and crew and probe the natives living there. What are they? Violent, savage, lawless, or friendly to strangers, God-fearing men? And there's that phrase, God-fearing men, that specifically means Zeus, Xenios, is who they're fearing, Zeus of the stranger. And they find the natives, and they're not very friendly. And here we see Cyclops munching on the leg and arm of numbers of, and we can see some dismembered crew members lying there on the ground. And the Cyclops says, I don't give a rat's ass about Zeus or anything like that. Odysseus and his men know that they're in deep trouble in the cave of the Cyclops. But Odysseus is never at a loss. And he comes out, and they had wine with them. And he pours lots of wine unmixed with water. The Greeks used to mix their wine with water so it wouldn't make them so immediately drunk. But they don't do that for the Cyclops, Polyphemus. And the Cyclops asks him, what's your name? And Odysseus says, nobody. That's my name. And let me say this, nobody, this is a kind of a meme in the life of Odysseus over the next 2,500 years, that Odysseus will, as we'll see, will increasingly become nobody as he loses everything. He's not a king anymore. He's not a father anymore. He's not a husband anymore. He's become nobody. But here he's just telling Polyphemus that he's nobody. And then gets him good and drunk. Polyphemus goes to sleep. And then they take a stake of wood, they sharpen it, they harden it in the fire, and they poke out his eye. This is a very early black figure vase. It's what's called the name vase of the Polyphemus painter. And by the way, this vase contained the ashes of a 10-year-old boy. It was a funeral vase. And they blind Polyphemus. But they're still in a lot of trouble because they're stuck in Polyphemus's cave. He's put a gigantic rock so they can't get out. And he sits there at the front of the cave, and when he lets his sheep out, he's feeling the sheep to make sure that there are no Greeks on them. And so Odysseus's next stratagem is he ties his men onto the bottom of the sheep so that they can leave and get past the Cyclops and get out into freedom. And then they get into their ship and they start to go away. But Odysseus can't resist taunting Cyclops. And he says, Cyclops, because Cyclops comes out screaming that he's been blinded. And all of the other Cyclopses come and say, who did this to you? And he says, nobody did it. And so the other Cyclopses say, well, if nobody did it, then that means it must come from the gods. So we can't help you. So Odysseus has made a fool of Polyphemus, but he can't leave it at that. So let me point to another theme in Greek literature is the concept of hubris. This is a terrific example of the hubris of Odysseus. Hubris is overweening arrogance, over the top, basically taunting the gods. And he comes and he says, Cyclops, if any man on the face of the earth should ask you who blinded you, shamed you so, say Odysseus, raider of cities, he gouged out your eye. And that was a real big mistake because Polyphemus was the son of Poseidon, and Poseidon liked him. And he prays to Poseidon, and Poseidon hears him, and that is the point at which Poseidon becomes Odysseus's great enemy. But meanwhile, they get away and they're back out on the wine dark sea. The next island that they get to is called the island of the Lastrygonians, and they're basically more cannibalistic giants. And they hurl giant boulders at Odysseus's small fleet, and they sink 9 of his 10 ships. So 90% of Odysseus's comrades are dead, gone. The ones that they caught floating, they ate. The rest of them drowned, and Odysseus got away in only his one ship. Back out on the wine dark sea. Until they spot another island. What's going to happen here? Well, they get to the island, and Odysseus appoints one of his men to lead a search party. And they go out and they find the palace of Circe. And Circe is surrounded by lions, bears, tigers, wolves, vicious animals, but they're not acting in their normal way. And so Homer says, they came nuzzling around my men, lions, wolves, and the men cringed in fear, but still they paused at her doors, Circe, and deep inside they heard her singing. And Circe is not an immortal in the sense that she doesn't have powers like gods and nymphs. She's a sorceress. She's a witch, essentially. So she then has Odysseus's men drink, and she pulls out her magic wand, and she turns them into beasts, pigs, mostly. And one of Odysseus's crew didn't go in, and he did manage to escape and come back and tell Odysseus. So now Odysseus has to go and rescue them, even though he has no idea how he's going to keep himself from having the same thing happen to him. But fortunately for him, the gods are on his side. And the god Hermes, and we can see him on the right with his winged helmet, and he's carrying in his hand the caduceus, which is his symbol, and he gives an herb to Odysseus and says to him, when she gives you something to drink, put this herb in that, and she will lose her power over you. You will not, she cannot enchant you. And then once that happens, pull out your sword and put it to her throat and demand that she restore your men to their normal state, which she does, and then becomes very, at that point, submissive to Odysseus, and they sleep together. And then Odysseus gets her to start telling him what's going to happen for the rest of his journey. And that's when she tells him that he has to go to the house of the dead, to the underworld. Another journey calls. You must travel down to the house of death and the awesome one, Persephone. And she tells him that he will have to do a sacrifice of a white goat and a black sheep, or a black goat, and a white sheep and a black goat. And she brings them to his boat before he leaves. That's the scene that's being illustrated here. And she gives him detailed instructions that he has to go to the underworld. He has to sacrifice these animals and conjure up the spirit of the prophet Tiresias, who will tell him more information about how he might possibly get home. And they're off again, and this is not such a happy journey because they're going to the land of the dead. And when they get there, they do the sacrifice, and the dead all come crowding around, but Odysseus drives them off as he's been instructed. And then a little interesting scene. This is a friend of his named Elphenor, who was at Circe's island with them. And after they were all turned back to normal people, he got drunk and went to sleep on the roof and fell off the roof and died. But nobody knew it. And so he hasn't been buried, which is a horrible thing for the Greeks. So he appears to Odysseus in the underworld and begs him, basically forces him to take an oath that he'll go back and bury him with the proper rites. And this is one of the very few promises that Odysseus actually keeps. Once again, you can see the sacrificed animals between them. Finally, the ghost of Tiresias does appear and tells him that you and your crew may still reach home suffering all the way if you only have the power to curb your wild desire and curb your own. And he tells him that they will come to the island of the god of the sun, the island of the sun. The sun god is Helios, by the way, not Apollo, as many people have been led to believe by, children's mythology books. But the Greek god of the sun was not Apollo at all. So the sun god has cattle on his island that he deeply loves. And Tiresias says, you are going to go there. If you leave the cattle alone, you and your crew will get home. If you touch any of them, you will all die in the most horrible way. If you yourself don't do it, possibly you may get back with the most horrible suffering, but no one else will. So here's your typical fairy tale formula. Don't do this. Well, of course, this is what we're going to do. So then Odysseus, while he's in the underworld, then decides to go interview some of the ghosts, and he sees his mother. He tries to embrace her. Then he goes through all of the famous women of antiquity that he sees and he describes. And then he describes the torments of people like Tantalus and Sisyphus. These are people. Sisyphus is punished by having to push a stone up the hill and have it, and when it gets near the top, it rolls back. These are the people being punished in Hades. Odysseus sees them, and then he sees some of his old comrades from Troy. And there's a very famous scene where he sees Achilles, and Achilles is basically on what's supposed to be the best place in the land of the dead, the Elysian fields. And Odysseus says, well, you must feel pretty good. You're the king of these Elysian fields. And Achilles says, You're absolutely wrong. I would rather be the worst, meanest, lowest slave on earth than the king of all the dead. So they head back, they're done, and they go back to Circe's island. Odysseus asks Circe about the rest of his journey, and she starts to tell him what he's going to encounter and what he needs to do in order to avoid being killed on the way. So the first thing, oops, wrong way, sorry, that he'll encounter after that are the sirens. And so this is a Victorian or Edwardian picture. The sirens are beautiful women, mermaids essentially. You can see as they come up onto the boat, their mermaid tail disappears. And the story is, as most people know, they have a seductive singing voice in which they lure sailors to their death on the rocks, and then they eat them. But Odysseus decides he wants to hear their song, so he instructs his men to tie him to the mast, and he fills their ears with wax so they can't hear it, and that way he can hear the sirens without suffering the consequences. Now, this idea that these sirens were beautiful women, this is not the way the Greeks saw them. The Greeks saw them as monsters. They had the heads of women, they had the bodies of birds of prey, they had talons, they were not pleasant at all. Here's another ancient depiction, and the menace, you can see the sirens off to the right, and those are actual birds of prey there. So the modern world likes to clean up some of these ancient images and likes to be tantalized and titillated, so they make them into beautiful naked women instead of horrible monsters and cannibals. The next thing that Odysseus encounters is Scylla and Charybdis, which is Scylla is a monster, which you see on the left, essentially a woman with 6 heads with lizards on them, who, if you go close to her, these 6 heads will come out and grab a member, each one will grab a member of the crew and eat them. But the other side is Charybdis, which is a monstrous whirlpool, which will kill them all. And so they have to try to, so Circe tells him that you can't fight Scylla, no way to do it, just take the hit, let 6 of your men die, it's better than all of you dying. And that's essentially what happens. Interestingly, what we're looking at here is a coin minted by the country of Palau. It's a silver coin, and for some reason, I think this is actually minted by some distributors, but it's an official currency of the island of Palau. Finally, they reach the island of the sun, and there are the cattle of the sun. And as you would guess, Odysseus falls asleep. And you can see over here one of his crew shushing everybody, shushing the viewer, not to wake up Odysseus, while his crew round up the cattle of the sun and have a huge feast. And then they get back on their boat, and Helios goes to Zeus and says, they killed my favorite cattle. This cannot be allowed to stand. And Zeus sends his thunderbolt and destroys the ship. And now we see back to this depiction that I showed earlier of the vase. And this is exactly what Homer describes. Odysseus managed to survive sitting on the upturned keel of his ship. All of his comrades drown, eaten by the fishes, and of the 500 people and treasure that he left with Troy with, he's now completely alone. He's shipwrecked. He's got nothing. And he basically lands on Calypso's island. And she takes him in, she greets him, and she shows one type of hospitality, which is that she welcomes him, but bad hospitality because she won't let him go. She wants him to stay her husband. And so now we're back to where we started. This is where Odysseus was before he got on his raft and encountered Poseidon. And this ends the tales that he's telling to the Phaeacians. He's back in their court. And now they will now do what they promised, which is that they're going to put him on a boat and take him back home to Ithaca. And so the next scene is of him on Ithaca, and he kisses the ground. He meets Athena, though she's disguised, and she tells him that it's on Ithaca. And she asks him who he is. And so what does Odysseus do? He comes up with another huge whopper of a lie. And of course, he can't lie to Athena, but she loves it. And she essentially says, that's why I like you so much. You're like me. You are the cleverest man, and I am the cleverest god. And let's sit down and scheme together about how you're going to go back and take revenge on the suitors. So she turns him into an old man, an old beggar, so that he will go unrecognized. I'm going to pause here for a moment because we're about to go into the last part of the book. So, and we finished the adventures, which is what most people, I think, essentially take away from the story. So anything that people want to ask or comment about or say about these really classic stories?
We all want to know what's going on now. What's going to happen?
What's going to happen next? Okay, well, what's going to happen next then is that Odysseus is now going to go around the island and see who's still loyal to him and who's not. So he goes and finds his old swineherd named Eumaeus, a slave, who sees him, a beggar wearing rags, and welcomes him in and takes him into his house and makes a seat for him of branches and twigs and puts his own sheepskin over it and shares a meal with him. And Odysseus thanks him and says, no king could be treated better than this. And Eumaeus says to him, let's see if I can find this. Eumaeus says to him, it's wrong, my friend, to send any stranger packing, even one who arrives in worse shape than you. Every stranger and beggar comes from Zeus. And whatever scrap they get from the likes of us, they'll find it welcome. And so he then welcomes him and tells him how these suitors are eating him out of house and home and oppressing his son, and how his father has basically now made himself into a recluse, a hermit. And once again, there's some interesting things. It seems that Eumaeus, even though he's a slave, has his own slaves that he's bought, that he's purchased with his own money. Because since Odysseus was away and he needed people to help him guard Odysseus's herds of pigs, he just bought some slaves to him on his own ticket in order to do that. And Odysseus is overwhelmed with his loyalty, but he tells him another huge lie about who he is, where he came from. It's a lie that goes on for 7 or 8 pages. One really interesting lie. And but then he goes back and goes to the suitors. At some point, I'm not sure exactly where it is, he reveals himself to the swineherd and his son and tells them that he's going to go into his house, but they should not betray who he is or that they know him. He's still disguised as a beggar. And he goes in, and the suitors, well, first thing is that as he walks in, no one recognizes him but his old dog. This is the scene that we saw on the Roman coin. It's an amazing scene in an ancient story. There's really nothing like that I've seen in any of ancient literature. The love of a dog for their master, not an immortal dog, not a talking dog, just a regular dog that loves his master and has enough energy to wag his tail 2 or 3 times and then just die. He's lying on the dung heap, which is the only place since he's cast out and he's decrepit and is no good for anything. Really touching moment. And it really, so it gives what is for me the really, what I love so much about Homer, which is this combination of strangeness and familiarity. So we have this strange world, which is nothing like any of us can possibly imagine. At the same time, there are these moments where there are things that have happened to every single one of us. So we have this strangeness, and yet there's something that speaks to us across this enormous gulf of time. And it makes us want to learn more of the world in which they're in. So people have changed, but they haven't changed. That, to me, is profoundly moving. So the suitors, who are nasty, nasty people, there's another beggar there who doesn't like having Odysseus as a beggar come in because he's the official beggar that gets their cast-offs. So he challenges him to a fight, and Odysseus destroys him, just totally destroys him. I don't think he kills him, but just about leaves him dead. And then comes in, and then Penelope comes down, and there's a scene where it's not clear whether Athena puts this into her head, but she says, okay, you've caught me with my trick with the loom and the, unweaving the weaving. So here's what I'm going to do. I have Odysseus's bow. Odysseus is a famous archer. And I'm going to put together these axe heads. I'm going to line up these axe heads, and there's like a loop in them. And whoever can string Odysseus's bow and shoot an arrow through all of these axe heads, that's the one I will marry. So all the suitors, they fight with each other. Who's going to do it first? And none of them can even string the bow. They can barely bend it. They warm it on the fire. They rub oil on it. They do everything they can possibly can, but none of them can even put a string on it. And then Odysseus, still as the beggar, says, well, let me try. And the suitors are really offended by this. What, this beggar is going to try to show us all up? But Telemachus gets up and says, no, the beggar may try. He asserts himself in his house. And of course, Odysseus throws off his rags, grabs the bow, and Telemachus picks up a spear, and his father Laertes is there, the swineherd is there, and they kill every last suitor, even ones that begged for mercy. The only person they spare is the bard. And that is the end of the suitors. Odysseus has taken his revenge. His hallways are filled with blood. And then he goes and he has an interview with Penelope, and she won't believe him. He says, I'm Odysseus. And she says, the point here being that she's just like him. You can't fool her. You can't lie to her. She's too wise. She's not going to take what somebody says to her on face value. She basically tests him and finally says to him, well, I've moved out of our old bedroom and I've moved my bed to a different place. And the Odysseus freaks out and he says, how, you couldn't do that? Because one pillar of your bed is a live olive tree. I built the bed with that as one pillar. You couldn't possibly move it. And with that, Penelope recognizes him and acknowledges him. and they are reconciled, and they they go to bed, and it's not the end of the story. You would think that dramatically it should be the end of the story, but it's not. There's another scene where the families of the suitors come and want to take their revenge. Athena comes down in between them and says, okay, this is enough, no more. And then finally, to escape the curse of Poseidon, what Odysseus now has to do is to take an oar over his shoulder, go on the mainland, and keep walking inland until he meets people who don't know what an oar is, who think it's a threshing paddle used for winnowing grain. When he's that far from the ocean that they don't know what an oar is, then Poseidon's curse is over. And it's commonly believed among scholars that this book was a later edition with this description, but that is essentially the end of the Odyssey. So.
Wow, great presentation. I have to say, wonderful.
Not quite done. Give me another 1 more minute here. So 730 BC to 2019 BC, we see, what this has done for showing people's imaginations. But whoa. This is real, believe it or not, as Alice in Wonderland as this may seem. This is real. Odyssey banned for violent sexism in Lawrence, Massachusetts. Read this last paragraph. Ha ha ha, said Heather Levine, an English teacher at Lawrence High School. High school, no less. Very proud to say we got Odyssey removed from the curriculum this year, because it's sexist and racist and ableist. I didn't even know what ableist was until I read this. Apparently, ableism is where you glorify people who are healthy over people who are handicapped in some way. And even the word handicapped, I don't know the right word to use that's politically correct, but that's not a good word to use either anymore. I don't know, it's challenged, whatever it is.
Dad, ableism is discrimination and prejudice against people who are disabled.
Fine, and those are horrible things, but that's, is that a reason to deny your children this access to this treasure that has stirred our imaginations for thousands of years? And Odysseus says, what the fuck?
We could have a long talk about this later, but
we will, I'm sure. And we've had this talk before, and but
we haven't had this talk.
Pardon me? We've had this talk, and we've had many different flavors of this talk, and I'm sure we'll have it again.
Well, another travesty about the end of or prohibition of reading Homer is there is this huge side of which we can't get involved with right now that I have touched on in my past education, is the original poetry of the language in which Homer or the poet can live in tonality and revive. Let's say if you're rowing on the feeling of rowing out into the ocean, or the beauty of the sunlight where you can actually feel the sunbeams, that's an aspect of the poetry that we don't have, the knowledge about, but it exists for the few in the world that, who enjoys that beauty. And same thing, Huckleberry Finn is banned from college or high school reading because it's racist, but these are documents of great, relic and history.
And that's despite the fact that the black slave Jim is enabled to escape from racist Southerners by the efforts of Huckleberry Finn, right? They depict the slave in a very noble and respectful way, and they assist him in escaping, and they protect him from people who want to throw him back into slavery, but it's banned. And the same people that are doing this over here, they're quite open about it. Their next target is Shakespeare.
By the way, just going back to this one detail I just remembered as you were talking. I mean, obviously you can't say everything. One of the ways how he convinced Penelope for sure that he is Odysseus is that he had a wound from the hunt that he acquired before, and he showed it to her, right?
No, not quite. Yes, he had a wound from a boar hunt when he was a young man, but that's not Penelope who sees it.
Yeah, it's his old nanny, right?
It's the slave woman
right.
who, when he comes to see Penelope, she has Eurycleia wash his feet, and as she's washing his feet, she sees the scar and recognizes him.
Right.
And
yeah.
And Odysseus grabs her, and says,
Right.
Not a word.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I remember now. He told her all the clothes that he wear going to Troy, right? She hasn't seen him for 20 years. People might probably change in 20 years, right?
Right.
It's like 10 years of war and 10 years of his returns. So he described in detail all the clothes that he wore, right? And
right,
yeah,
but it was the bed that was
right.
That's what closed the deal, right? Because she got him angry, she didn't say it as if it was a test. She, said something that someone who didn't know would not have even remarked on. I moved my bed to a different place. Okay, if you're not Odysseus, you say, okay, nice, you moved your bed. But Odysseus said, you can't do that. It's impossible. Did you cut down the tree? What have you done?
Yeah, but I also I just wonder how come all these suitors for so many years they were living in the house. I mean, obviously he was very rich that he could afford that, but they were living in the house. It probably also had something to do with the laws of hospitality. That
they were violating the laws of hospitality.
Yeah, they were,
because they were imposing on Telemachus and basically eating him out of house and home. He had no choice. He had no agency, right?
Yeah, and actually, you remember they actually decided to kill him. They had a conspiracy to because when he was coming back from his trip, right, to Nestor and Menelaus, right, from the mainland, they put the ship, and they were planning to kill. And Athens, right. Athena warned him and told him to go by night.
She told him avoid. She said avoid the Windward Islands.
Right, and so so they actually really conspired to kill Telemachus because he was coming of age and becoming more assertive.
Yeah, because he went into the assembly and he basically said,
"Yeah,
you people are outrageous." Up until that time, he had been cowed and he'd been kind of submissive. He was a kid. What is he going to do? Yeah. Surrounded by all these men, maybe 100 people, grown men. And then he, so under the teachings of Athena, disguised as mentor, he grows up and he goes to the assembly in Ithaca, and he basically calls them out. Says, "Here's what they're doing," and they basically say, "You don't like it? Tough luck." But they see at that point that he's a danger to them, right? Up until then, he was no danger, but now clearly he's a danger. He's going to go to the mainland. He's got connections with people like Menelaus, the king of Sparta,
right?
Nestor, the king of Pylos. So these are all, he could come back with an army. So he's now dangerous. They have to get rid of him. There's really, let me just show one final slide. There's such a huge amount of writings that are based on this. And these are two that I read relatively recently that I really enjoyed, that I wanted to recommend to people. Circe by Madeline Miller. It's a wonderful book, really wonderful book.
Yeah, I read it. Yeah, very good.
And she has another book about Patroclus and Achilles.
Right.
Which is also quite enjoyable, but this is a real
Song of Achilles, it's called.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then this other book on the right, this is a collection. It says a novel, but what it is a collection of short vignettes, some of them a half a page long, some of them 3 or 4 pages long. And they're like little riffs on different aspects of Odysseus and the Odyssey. All different ways of looking at it, very imaginative. So if you enjoy this sort of stuff, if you enjoy historical fiction, if you enjoy fantasy, you'll probably enjoy these. So that's all I got, everybody.
Oh, it was terrific.
Thank you, Paul. This
Yeah,
was
very
wonderful.
enjoyable.
Yes.
We want more.
Wonderful pictures going along with the story. I mean, it's amazing.
Oh, they were terrific art history. Thank you. Someone mentioned these are recorded and how to access them.
So
can you tell me?
Go to the website. I'll post the website right here. It's called omnicarta.org, and there is a YouTube channel that you can access through the website, or once you access through the website, there's also a link on the top to YouTube channel, Twitter, Instagram. You can click on YouTube channel, and then it will take you where you can subscribe to the channel. Every time we post something, you'll get a notification.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I also want to just say that I'm very pleased that I came in within time. I think that, that's a real courtesy that presenters give to their audience. And, we have time left for discussion, and we're not asking anybody to stay after their planned end. I think I'm very proud of having accomplished that.
Yes. Very, very well done. Well managed.
Yeah, it was really, really, right on time, and everything was just, suited and fitted to the presentation, which, is amazing. Nothing went left or right. It was right on point. And I guess, is it possible that you guys, can talk a little bit about Homer himself? I mean, we know it's like an early, we can't even call him, right? Or, you can correct me, Paul. They didn't identify themselves as Greek yet, so to speak, or the, and I know that Homer also was mixed blood, right? There's some Lydian or Phoenician blood.
We don't know anything about Homer.
Yeah.
We don't know anything about Homer. We don't even know if he exists.
Right.
I think the most that we know about Homer is that, there were a group of people who call themselves the sons of Homer, who were on one of those islands in the northern Aegean, but it's legendary, was no way of knowing. But there is something called the Homeric problem. And there are shelves and shelves in the library of scholars debating this, and they're around the question of, was the Iliad and the Odyssey, were they written by the same person? Were each of them written by a single person? Were they written or were they oral? At what point were they committed to writing? And
I think at the time of the Homer, nothing was written. I don't think they only started to write. I don't think they committed to writing.
Well, this was exactly the time. This 730 BC.
But I don't think they wrote anything.
The age of colonialism, and not only was it the beginning of the Olympic Games, it also was the rebirth of literacy. that was when the Phoenician alphabet was imported into Greece. So it's quite possible that one of the first things that was ever done with the alphabet was to write down the story of the Iliad.
It's possible, but a lot of people believe that during the life of Homer, nothing was written. It was written later.
So
It was all oral.
absolutely, yeah. Those are the two poles. I mean, my own personal, this is a belief. I'm not a scholar and I can't argue this, but
yeah, no, nobody knows for
but
sure.
my personal belief, is that Homer was two people. He was an older bard, firmly in the bardic tradition, who had spent his whole life doing this, and a young man, perhaps his protege, who had learned to write. And together they committed it to writing.
Yeah, well, my personal belief is that that Homer is not one but many people. Maybe there was one more prominent than others, and I think that it's been living in oral tradition for maybe another 100 years before it was written. That's my belief. Again, belief.
I agree with you. I'm saying exactly the same thing. I'm saying that this bard was a part of that oral tradition, one among many. And we know from studies of oral poetry that every poet, every bard changes the story. You have to. You change.
Yeah, of course.
You have to make contemporary references. So
and maybe adding something.
And so you have what is essentially a Mycenaean era story. I mean, Troy is a historic place. It's a real place. It was a great trading city, exactly where Homer said it was. They've excavated it. It was part of the, there are Hittite records that prove the existence of Troy and actually the existence of Achaeans. But over the, when you actually read the Iliad or the Odyssey, the social world that you see is much closer to 700 BC than it is to 1200 BC.
Right.
Yes. They even say that the fighting in Iliad is actually as if it was fighting with the iron weapons. I mean, the tactics were as if it's an iron weapons, not the bronze.
Oh, talking about spilling ink, the question of when hoplite tactics were developed, and does Homer know hoplites? That's another thing. Shelf after shelf after shelf, and this gets all the military historians hot and bothered. I love to read this stuff, and they just endlessly argue with each other about, is there a phalanx in Homer? Because sometimes Homer talks about densely packed soldiers with their spears bristling and so forth, though they never really have any active role. It seems as if the mass of the soldiers don't do anything except get killed by the heroes. But they're there. And there are a few scenes in which you can say, well, it kind of sounds like a phalanx. Their arms sound kind of, there are a number of different types of arms that are described in there. Whenever you see pictures of Homeric warriors on Greek vases, they're always wearing hoplite armor, right? They have that round shield, right? That's certainly not Mycenaean.
Anybody else have any questions?
I was at Greece when I was younger, and after I had read Odysseus, and there was a line.
That was a couple of years ago, right? Pardon? You were younger a couple of years ago. You were younger.
I wish. I remember, I studying some Greek, and I forget how it goes, and I studied a few lines here and there, but I remember about I was going to the Epidaurus classic theater, Epidavros, and they were doing some I don't know, Sophocles. But anyway, I was riding the bus from one of the small port in the Peloponnese to Epidavros, and I remember very vividly the moonlight through the pines, and that's talks about it when Homer goes home, I mean, Odysseus goes home to Ithaca in the night, and there's moonlight through the pines. I always thought that was Ray Charles, but it's actually Homer.
Yes, yes. Well, you know, the Steely Dan wrote about the wine dark sea, or and Ulysses tied to the mast.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you reminded me of Ulysses tied to the mast. That was a yeah, that was vivid. Taking Greek then.
I must say, I don't really, you know, I see, you know, your pronunciation of the Greek names is very authentic. I'm never really sure how to do it myself. I mean, I know that modern Greeks, like Achilles, in modern Greek, I know they pronounce that Achilleos, because I was in Greece and I heard a mother calling to her son, Achilleos, Achilleos. You know? But I don't think that the ancient. I think in ancient Greek it might have been more like Achilles, but I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, it was like I mean, I tell you, all of the because I'm a Russian speaking, and all of the Greek names in Russian sounds exactly right. They exactly sounds like Greek. So
Right.
I kind of I do get an idea. I have more problems with in English.
Right. Well, you call him right. You call Platonos instead of Plato.
No, not without OS. Platon.
Platon. Yes.
Actually, a lot of US and OS is added by English language. It's not in Greek.
Well, I think
a lot of it not.
The US is Latin and OS tends to be Greek. So you have
but a lot of it is not there as well. I think a lot of it just straight on like Platon. Like,
but the thing to keep in mind is that Greek is a very highly inflected language. So it means that there were, you know, a myriad endings to the words.
So,
you know, so like I talked about nostos, right? Well, in plural, that's nostoi. You know, I mean, there's so many different ways, you know, so that, you know, it's hard to say what is the definitive way, or a linguist would know what is the, you know, the definitive infinitive.
Yeah. By the way, the city and where the amphitheater, you said in Russian they would pronounce epidavr, so it's very similar to what you've said.
My Greek friend used to call it epidavros. Epidavros.
Okay, maybe yeah. The ending in Russian it's cut off. Yeah.
Also, it depends where it lies in the sentence, because if it precedes or follows a vowel, and what kind of a vowel, and it changes rules in the pronunciation. That part of studying Greek is really tedious.
Yeah, and the meter that Homer uses is basically
hexameter, right?
Dactylic hexameter, right? So you can hear like a name like Dam Achilleos, Dam Odysseus, right? That just Agamemnon, those names just fall into that meter.
Right.
Sounds rap to me.
Thank you so much. I look forward to the next time. Thank you so much. It was very enjoyable. Good night.
Yeah, we have to have Paul to commit to more of this kind of presentations. Nobody else can do it like that.
Very enjoyable. Thank you.
Indeed, yes.
Great, Paul. Thank you very much.
And let me just finally say how joyful it was to have my daughter attend. So this was a great evening for me. Even though I did,
she was joking.
Even though I did rub her the wrong way at the end.
I thought that was a private joke about dad.
No, we have arguments about, you know, political correctness, and as young people and old people, you know, I was much further on the left when I was her age, and now I'm much more in the middle, at least, let's say.
By the way, may I ask, will there be, is anyone, or has there been, I'm relatively new to this wonderful group, but any historical or future interest in economic history? social political history.
Do you want to present? Because I can.
Oh, no, just that I've been leaning left most of my adult life, but I've been reading some Milton Friedman, who's really convincing and charming. And so I want to discover more the right side now. And I was,
You know, before the pandemic, we used to meet in a bar. Where was it, like 20 on 31st Street or something, Zach? 27th Street, you know? And so those were before we did Zoom and before we recorded it, but I made a presentation at that time about the city of Uruk, based on the writing of a Marxist ancient historian, Mario Liverani, and I was presenting his thesis about primitive accumulation and how the civilization took off. So you would have enjoyed that one.
Oh, I sure would have. I love Marx.
We don't have the recording. I should have recorded that somehow.
That one's lost in the airwaves.
Yeah.
That's why I'm recording it for posterity. And I'm recording in 2 places, you know, Facebook and YouTube channel. So we have it, you know, if one lost, another was there. And I'm also,
but I'm also thinking economic history. It's kind of difficult. That you have to be really into that. Yeah.
Well, hold on. I mean, you could do economics. You know, you can do Marx Weber and all that.
Well, you can do social history.
Correct.
In which you can have, you know, economic components and you know, demographic components and social components, and it's really quite an interesting story about how people lived. You know, and in fact, you know, I'm supposed to give this thing on what does it mean to be Greek coming up in a few weeks. That's really what it's going to be, is what does it mean socially to be a Greek?
It should be really interesting.
Okay. Yeah. Looking forward to it.
Let me just put up the schedule. There's only 10 of us left, but for a second, you know, and again, I apologize. Paul, is it okay?
Please.
Okay. Sorry. Not to steal anybody's thunder, guys. All right. All right.
By the way, if you want to do the Play-Doh, it's not going to be like that at all. It's more of a discussion than presentation.
Well, we can. You know, I was thinking you can do it in collaboration with Alex if you want. Alex is still around?
I don't know how you would do that, but I don't mind if he does it, if he's interested. I would gladly participate. Maybe he wants to do it. I mean, you know, I've done a lot of presentations, but it's always nice if someone else.
Sure. No, I mean, I can offer it to him. But
please go ahead. Go offer it to him, and if he doesn't want it, then I'll do it.
He gave me a different one he wants to do. I'll tell you which ones he told me he wants to do. So, did you ever do this one? And didn't offer anything, but we'll do.
Which one?
That, I'll tell you which one he told me. 1 second. So he wanted to do. He wanted to do Republic.
Wonderful.
No, but the Republic is a very big one. It's really very difficult for everybody to read.
The Republic is like a semester college course.
Right. It's a very big one. It's a whole it's a long discussion unless you want to do a piece of it. This is political, you know, history. You could say, because he defined all the possible political governing, you know, the structures. Republic. I mean, he can try to do it. I don't know how he's going to do it. I mean,
he'll do the parable of the cave, and then what?
Yeah, but you can just then also the same thing goes with Aristotle's politics, which is just exactly continuation of Republic. You know, it's exactly a continuation. You have to just go like this.
I have difficulty with Plato, but I find Aristotle completely impossible. It's like smacking a brick against my head.
It's much harder, but I don't have problem with Plato. I don't know. Somehow I enjoy him. But the thing is that between the Republic and Plato's politics, there's exactly connection because they talk exactly about the same thing, and Aristotle develops the ideas of different kind of structure, governing structures. He uses the same, like about the oligarchy and aristocracy, democracy, and he's actually developed that theory. But that's what I'm saying. I mean, if you want to do Republic, I mean, sure, but it's very, very difficult. I cannot even imagine how we could do it in one session.
All right, so maybe we can,
And it's a big one.
It's it for later. First,
it's almost a book.
Let's do the dialogue first, and then leave it. I actually wanted to do something from a Diadochi's area, since we're gonna be in Diadochi's for at least 2 or 3 sessions. But
okay,
I don't know. I mean, it's up to you guys. But whatever.
Like what? Like what? What's in that period? What specific?
Aristotle, right? Aristotle, and Alexander the Great, and
Aristotle, yeah, maybe a little before, but again, listen, Plato is much more interesting in my idea. Aristotle is more of a scientist.
I mean, Plato was a poet.
Well, philosopher and poet, right?
But he was a poet. He was considered a poet.
Right. So I just want to go over the schedule quickly. Sorry, guys. So on the ancient part, we have Diadochi on 3-6, and then let's just cover Hellenistic first. And Paul just mentioned that what means to be Greek on 320. On the modern part, and again, if somebody can give me a line of the schedule for Roman, I just need the listing of what are we going to cover in Roman history after on 11, 12, 13, and going forward. Give me the whole 2 years. I don't care. We'll put because the Roman is going to be for a while. We're going to be stuck there for a good year, if not more. Then on the modern one, outside of ancient history, we have monastic orders, Benedictus, Dominicians, Jesuits, and is presenting that. On 314, Sergio might swap with the rise of Aztecas with the conquest of Americas. He's not sure yet. And then Rich and Sam, I got to reach out to Sam, is going to do 328. We did Homer today. And then here I'm going to put the dialogues tonight, and I'll push it to the end of March, Greg, if it's okay with you. So that
sure.
Yeah, I'll put it in the March, and then somewhere in in April we'll do Plato's Apology of Socrates and stuff like that. All right. On 331, will be an interesting one. Is this guy Joshua writes a book on the interaction between Vikings and Muslim, part of the Spain, Al-Andalusia, and he's going to finish the book by the time, and he wants to present it, talk about the topic. Tomorrow we have history of soccer. It's usually going to be me presenting. Aaron is going to be part of it, but Napoleon, I need to present on Napoleon if anybody wants to step up. If not, I'll do it. Richard wants to do Jewish nature. It's allegorical, I guess, view of Jewish nature. And then Sergey is going to help me with history of ancient weapons. On 3-4, we have Andrew presenting the Richard the Lionheart, the Third Crusade. Andrew was here for John the Lackland. That's a brother of Richard the Lionheart. And then Mark is working on history of wine. So that's, and we have another Paul's presentation, April on 4-8, on the history of mining and metallurgy. I'm looking for anybody who wants to throw any topics on particular subject matter. We even did ancient sex history, and it's been a big hit. And thanks, Greg, helped me out a lot. Talked about the story of Isis and Osiris. It's always interesting. So, we talked about Caligula and Nero and those, ancient.
There was a really good story in the Odyssey that would have fit that, which was when Ares and Aphrodite had an affair, and Aphrodite's husband Hephaestus found them, caught them, and put them in a net, and had all the other gods coming over and laughing at them.
Interesting. Well, it got such a hit that I already have 100 views on YouTube channel.
Great.
And
sex sells. There's no doubt about it.
And I'm thinking of maybe doing sex in ancient literature, something like that, and then maybe do a piece on, on that. So if you guys are interested, or maybe just segment it to separate, sex in Mesopotamia or sex in Egypt only alone. Because I kind of went skim through everything, but there's a lot of topics to talk about, prostitution, all that stuff. Greek alone, they were completely, different from us, and we can't use our mind to how they implemented or use sex for same sex, especially, and which I addressed, but I didn't do it justice. It was not something you can address in a 1 hour and 40-minute meeting. That's basically it. Like, if anybody can throw me a listing on Roman history, and I'm only up to the first kings, pre-Roman Republic, and I need whatever, the whole year up to Byzantium. I don't care, or whatever, and then we can add or subtract whatever people don't want, or we'll put it.
So yeah, okay, the Roman kings. There are kind of like 2 Roman kings things,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, we can certainly do, you can look at it from the point of view of, you could say one is, the early republic, would be one. Then another would be the unification of Italy.
Okay.
The invasion of Pyrrhus, right? The Pyrrhic victory.
Yeah, very interesting. You could go.
That'll be a separate. Yeah.
Then the first Punic War, then the second Punic War, then I want to do something on the 2nd century, which is the predecessors of the Gracchi, and the Roman campaigns in Macedonia, and then in
that's definitely, it's important.
And then there's a Roman social war, and we could do like biographies of Marius and Sulla, and ultimately Julius Caesar.
Yeah, and that's where we could have Sallustis.
Yes.
I just found out that Julius Caesar was a cross-dresser. I didn't. It
was a calumny.
Yeah.
It was a calumny. He was sent to King of Nicomedia, who was a very well known as a homosexual, and he was sent to obtain ships from him, warships, and he succeeded. So everybody said, well, how did he get them? What did he have to do in order to? So they made it all up. It was just, a political attack against Caesar.
You know that also maybe it was an attack, but the user usually says about Caesar that he's a man for every woman and a woman for every man. You ever heard of that? It's a
I don't know about a woman
thing.
for every man, but I know that he very famously screwed the wives of all the senators that were his enemies.
It was like that, and it was said as and also as a woman for every man. I mean, I remember this. It might have been slander or just anything like that, but that what was kind of like those sharp-witted, phrases that were floating around the Rome.
Yeah, you should tell me more about that. I'm curious.
Wow. Yeah, you see that it creates so much talk. And again, it wasn't anything that me and Greg did on Sunday. There was.
I wasn't even preparing. I was just like on the fly.
Yeah, it was great.
You did it. I wasn't even planning to go. You just changed the date. I couldn't go on Thursday. You just changed the date. That's why I could go.
Yeah, and it was amazing because it was on the fly. It was kind of like
So, Zach, I'll try to put together a chronology of Rome. in
Yes,
some
Yeah.
I appreciate it. But then
Yeah,
also,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, try to like really get every period, because I
yeah,
think
don't
we
be
should
don't be
really be
shy.
very thorough. Let's
Right, right,
just like spend our time on it.
Right.
That's how I feel it.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. The war of the orders between the plebeians and the
Right.
patricians.
Right, right. That when they decided to leave the city, right? The plebeians.
Right.
Yeah,
the
that's
secessions.
who's talking there? I'm sorry. We were just saying
But
something.
wondering if the Coriolanus was the topic with the plebeians and the patricians.
Definitely.
Yes,
Definitely.
yeah, of
You know,
course.
he hated the plebeians. I mean, well, I mean, I'm so much oriented towards Shakespeare with Coriolanus, though. I really can't think of Coriolanus without thinking about it through the lens of Shakespeare.
But I'm thinking like Plutarch, I think wrote has Coriolanus. No.
Well, could be because Shakespeare, used Plutarch extensively, really closely too.
Well, looking forward. Good night.
Min, if you wanted to present certain subject matter, let me know. Marika also signed up to do something.
Oh, I'm very inspired. I'll think of something and let you know, of course.
Great.
Yeah, because
Great.
I mean, we're it's
It's great. Everybody should, get your feet wet.
Yeah, I want to participate. I really enjoy this. I will look forward next time. I have to leave now.
Okay.
So
okay, time for all of us.
Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
All right, I'll stop the meeting and then let's.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
All right, take care. Thank you, Paul. It was great.